Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Jansoldier in a 15 plus 2 game on LeeChess.org. I wonder if Jan Gustafsson has sent one of his minions to terrorize me. We'll see. I'm playing the Sicilian, and I feel like a classical Sicilian today. So, but he has other plans. He's going to play bishop c4 instead of playing d4 directly. Okay, I think knight f6 is a good answer to this. Very often people play bishop c4 against the Sicilian at lower levels. I'm not saying Jan is a low-level player. He's got a rating over 2,000, which is quite good. But those of you who are watching this and play the Sicilian for black and maybe are below 2,000, you're going to come up against this line a lot. So I'm glad I get a game in it. Okay, so let's just develop here. I'm giving him another chance to play d4 if he likes. But he seems content to play in restrained fashion, which is fine. I generally like playing e6 and then preparing d5 against this bishop c4 system. I think this is a good way to handle it. Alternatively, you could fianchetto the dark square bishop. Against a lot of anti-Sicilians, it's a good idea to fianchetto the dark square bishop. All these moves look normal, so I'm trying to play them quickly. I'm not sure about a3. This seems random to me because it's not like white is going to play b4. I mean, I suppose they could think about that plan, but most of the time the queen side is black's domain in many of these anti-Sicilians. h3, likewise, it looks abstract to me. I mean, I'm not going to play knight g4, so why prevent that move? I could play d5 right away. I could also try to play a6 and look to play b5. I'm kind of leaning towards that plan because it creates some interesting possibilities on the queen side, but playing d5 is also pretty tempting, but I think I'll go with a6. I'm a little bit pressed for time today. I'm actually recording this well before I expect to publish this video, but busy day on my end, so hopefully I'll have some time to analyze afterwards. But if it goes long, I may not. I'll have to do a abbreviated analysis, let's say. Okay, so Jansoldier is revealing his intentions. He's playing f4, and he's probably going to bring the knight back to f3, or maybe press ahead with f5. You never know. So I could establish my knight on d4. I think this would be a standard reaction to what white is doing, but I suspect he's going to play his knight back here and offer a trade. But let's do it anyways, because if that trade occurs, I'll let it occur on d4, and I might gain a half-open c-file by virtue of doing this. So knight e2, he hasn't slowed down. Thinking about queen b6, once again, so as to be able to recapture with the pawn and get a half-open file. I'm also thinking about d5, just advancing. I might end up with a slightly weak pawn, though, in some cases, like d5, let's say e5, knight d7, knight takes d4, pawn takes d4. That pawn could be harder to advance if I'm no longer able to play e5 myself. So maybe trading and then playing d5 is a decent plan here. There's also that queen b6 move I mentioned. I probably don't want to play e5 because that opens his bishop further. Maybe allows him to push past with f5. I could consider taking and then playing c4. Or taking and then just playing rook c8. Taking is entirely acceptable. Maybe rook c8. Maybe I can keep more tension for a move and try to get him to play c3. Let's do that. So we're going to play like a useful move and just see if we can get white to take. And if I'm able to take back, I might have pressure against the pawn on c2. So let's pre-move this. I have my settings on LeeChess, at least for the classical portion, set to 2,000 plus. So I've had great luck in getting opponents over 2,000, which I can't say the same about ICC. Hence why I've been playing on LeeChess lately in these standard games. So c3 is played. I'm probably going to take and maybe play c4 thereafter. Although taking c4, he could take here and then go after b5. Gets kind of dynamic, but first let's take. Obviously he'll take back. So if c4 pawn takes, let's say I play Knight takes e4, because then if he takes b5, I do have queen b6 check to regain the pawn. It's an intriguing continuation. It's going to spice up the game a little bit if I do that too. Yeah, let's play it. So trying to undermine this structure. I think White would prefer it if this structure remained static so he could continue pushing on the king side. He's already indicated his intentions to attack me on this wing with f4. Yes, he moves like bishop b1. I feel he's playing some committal moves quickly. Okay, now I'm thinking about taking, and then should he take with the bishop, play d5? And should he advance, then play knight e4, threatening knight g3? I believe if a trade were to occur on e4, I would be in good shape there. So let's take. Via an unusual manner, we kind of got back into a normal open Sicilian structure with black having one extra central pawn. No tactics on e4 or anything, but d5 is a stereotypical break in the Sicilian, and the fact that I can play it now with multiple pieces firing at the e4 square bodes well for my position, I think. Yeah, now I'm going to hop in and threaten this move. Granted, I do have to worry about h7 a little bit, but knight g3 is on tap. This knight looks out of play on h2 for the time being. If he takes, then I'll gain the bishop pair, and also my light square bishop gets more scope. Plays queen g4. That's an interesting one. My first thought is, does that just lose material to check or queen check? Because then I can go knight f2 thereafter. And I'd probably rather play queen b6, because after king here, knight f2 check, rook takes f2, queen takes f2, I feel like my queen deep in his position could cause some issues, whereas my bishop would just be a target. There's also interesting ideas involving h5, trying to deflect his queen from guarding g3, but it doesn't quite work because he always has the f3 square to go to. So I think I'll probably play queen b6 check, king h1, knight f2, and be satisfied with the win of the exchange. Also maybe d4 later with my queen and my bishop aimed at g2 could be a good plan. I wish h5 would work now, but I don't think it does. It's pretty clear he didn't see queen to b6 or bishop c5, because those are not the type of moves that you would want to allow if you were white. I'm thinking about some wacky stuff here that I'm pretty sure doesn't work, but I'm just spending a few extra seconds confirming that notion. Like queen f2 even. It would be a cool move, trying to get him to take so I could take and then fork, and I'd emerge out the exchange and trade the queens. But if queen f2, he can play bishop takes e4, so that's unsuccessful. Likewise, I was considering d4 right now to open the bishop, but I really should just play for the exchange. Queen g1 check would be great if he had to take with a rook so I could smother mate him, but king takes g1 is legal. And again, h5 will be met by queen f3, so I don't see that leading anywhere. And then if d4, bishop takes e4, and my attack is refuted. So let's go for the material. His bishop is pointed at h7 still, so we must take care to defend this pawn. But for instance, queen h5, I think just g6 is fine, queen h6, and I can always give a check on the back rank, or even play that d4 move. That's probably more ruthless, attacking g2. He does very much have to worry about the d4 advance. That would be superb if I could get this bishop involved. I just got back from the gym about an hour and a half ago. Did some cardio, and I've noticed I always play better when I come back from the gym. So I'm going to try to make this a regular thing. Like, go to the gym and then record videos, especially if it's the serious videos. But But you know me, all my videos are serious. There should be a term in chess where someone spends very little time at the beginning of the game, gets in a bad position, and then tries to think their way out. Because I swear that's one of the most common phenomenons I see in these standard games. It's really fascinating. I'm not trying to disparage my opponent, but it's just when you see that pattern repeated over and over again, you start to realize that some tendencies are common across sites and even across ratings to some extent. Okay, so knight f3 looks sensible. I think his plan is probably bishop d2, followed by rook f1, if he could. I'm thinking about playing d4 as a sacrifice. Because you know what? If he takes with the knight, then h5 is working in that case. That's killer. Try to deflect his queen from the defense of g2. So if d4, he'd probably have to take with the pawn, and I gain this nice open file. Now, whether I can do anything with that file is a different matter. Bishop c5 also comes to mind, but I don't want to take away too many squares if my queen needs to retreat. This bishop is holding the g5 square, so I don't especially feel like I'm in danger there. The only thing is I'm not sure I can do much after this occurs. It's kind of annoying that I can't check here. I guess I could play this, take, and then take here, and try to force a queen swap. But that seems to kind of let him back in the game. Still, I want to get this involved. If f5, he can take en passant. I don't necessarily like that. Maybe d4 is not too bad. I mean, his structure will be kind of weak in the endgame. Maybe I can just go attack d4 later. Okay, let's play this breakthrough. Practically speaking, I think it might make the position easier for me to play if I always have this option and messing up his pawns and forcing the queens off the board. I'm thinking if c takes d4, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. But you know what? I actually just have check there, don't I? I guess queen f1. I was thinking I could go check and pick up the bishop. It's not quite working due to queen f1, but that's another way I could trade the queens if I want. Maybe my rook can invade on c2 at the very end. So the line I'm thinking of is c takes d4, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, queen e1 check, and then queen f1 is forced. Queen takes f1, bishop takes f1. Then let's say rook fd8 attacking this pawn, bishop e3, and then invade with the rook to c2. He'll have one pawn for the exchange, but my rooks are active. I wish I could get this piece more active. That'll be a tough call. I know I just drew a bunch of arrows there, but that'll be a tough call if bishop takes f3, queen takes f3 is played, which I can virtually force if I want. I'm also tempted to play a move like rook fd8 right now, like a semi-waiting move, considering that he can't move this bishop, because then I take f3 and I just crush. Maybe that's a pretty good plan. Just play a useful move while he's tied up. Can't hurt me with queen h5 or anything like that. So rook fd8 and bishop d2 is refuted instantly. I'm just threatening the pawn, basically. So if rook fd8, he might be obliged to attack, but what can he really do? Knight g5? Knight g5, I could just take it. I'm winning d4 next move. Guess he could maybe play f5. But still I'm capturing here, aren't I? Hitting his queen. That's going to slow him down. Okay, yeah, let's do this. So keeping the pieces on the board for a move in hopes of improving the whole variation. Bishop takes f3 coming. Twisting the knife, if you will. My rook was the only piece that wasn't activated yet. My bishop, this bishop, although it's passive, it does perform a useful function in defending the g5 square. I have a feeling that bishop takes f3, queen e1, queen f1, and taking was also a good line, but hey, if I can't find anything wrong with this move, trying to play that line next, then this might be even better. Yeah, and he goes f5. I think he kind of senses that he has to attack here. He really has no choice in the matter. So now if we take, if pawn takes, just check followed by rook takes c1, and I think he can resign there. So now let's take here, expecting a queen trade. The queen takes f3. I could even just play queen takes directly and then take d4. I could also do this move. I'm not sure it's worth spending a lot of time trying to figure out which one's best because they both look really good. So if check, queen f1, take here. I have ideas of rook d1 coming next. I think I'm going to do that one. Also, if queen e1, king h2, rook takes c1, any tricks with f6 or anything like that? Probably not. Maybe. You know what? I'm going to take here. I think this is just as good. I do get to attack his bishop with tempo, which is nice. I see he can play bishop e2 here, but I'll just take this pawn, and yeah, I mean, I'm up way too much material. It must be winning. So just to make things simple for us, let's do that. Rook c2 also was probably good. He gets one tempo in move in here, but I think his luck will run out eventually. Here I'm thinking rook c2. If bishop f3, we have rook d3. So just invading and attacking. If rook e1 here, bishop h4 is convincing. Trying to drive off the rook from defending the bishop. Guess he does have bishop d1. Actually didn't see bishop d1, but I can just take b2. No harm, no foul. I don't think my rook gets trapped because bishop c1 is impossible. Rook takes d1 check. So I'm up an exchange plus pawn and probably winning another pawn. Queen g4 was just too optimistic for white. He neglected his king safety on this long diagonal. And it's worth repeating, you can't think your way out of a bad position. All this time he's spending now, it's useless. A good player is going to put you away. Okay, here I'm thinking actually bishop c5 instead of even taking on b2. If I take b2, he can play rook c1, and he has some hope with a rook c8 coming. But bishop c5 seems to put him away pretty handily. If bishop g2, then I can play rook takes g2. It's just crushing. So I think this move forces a trade. Further simplifications. So let's do it. If he takes, I'll take this way, I think. Idea rook c1. He could play rook d1 then, but I think I can just bring this back. Yeah, that should be decisive. Actually, either capture is good, I think. Even taking this way and just denying him the use of the c and the d files makes sense. Yeah, I'll probably, after bishop takes c5, play rook d takes c5, rook d1, and then just g6. That looks like the best way to do it. I don't need to play rook c8. Let him have a check here and go king g7. Our rooks are going to run rampant on the first and the second ranks. Just nothing to do for white. If bishop c1, rook d1, and all his pieces are caught on the first rank. I wonder what his best chance was after rook fd8 when I played that improving move. I'm sure it's losing for white, but there might have been some way to muddy the waters. He's going into the tank. He spent more time on this move in a probably plus 5 or 6 position for black than he did on his first 15 moves combined. Maybe even more. Where did he make the blunder? Yeah, he made the blunder on move 18, queen g4, and he had at least 13 or so minutes, I would say. It is easier for higher rated players to pick out moments where you should spend time. And that's one comment I've received, because you guys know I harp on time management a lot in my videos. And I'll admit I'm not the perfect role model sometimes for time usage, because often I think too much. But some people will comment and say, well, you're a high rated player, like you can recognize those critical moments and know when it makes sense to spend time. And that's true, but look at the results of your games, and if you're routinely finishing games with half of your time remaining or more, that's a problem in my opinion, unless you're just blowing your opponents out of the water and you don't need that time. But more often than not, you're going to be playing games where you need to be using your time to finish off your opponent. If you aren't, you're probably underrated. I don't know, maybe you're just on a really good streak, but to finish off someone right around your own rating, you're going to have to use more than 50% of your time. I can mention some types of moves where it does make sense to spend time, these so-called critical moments. Oftentimes they're turning points in the game. So right before you're about to launch a big attack, for instance, in open positions where one move will matter and you have to find exactly the right move, that's an important moment where you just need to spend that time and figure out the best line. Decisions involving pawn structure are huge. The other player may have left the game. You can claim victory, call the game draw, or wait. I will claim victory because, yeah, it appears that he is just giving up and was going to let me sit there. So major turning points in the game like that. Whether you want to make a queen trade or not, that could impact greatly the result of the game and the landscape of the position. You want to weigh something like that pretty heavily. So I think the opening went well for black. A3 didn't really fit with white's scheme. I suppose A3 was useful in the sense that the bishop could eventually drop back to A2. But I think I showed a decent way of playing against these bishop C4, bishop C4 Sicilian lines. And playing E6 and preparing pawn D5 is a smart way to play against that, I think. Just trying to blunt the influence of the bishop. You could also, I mentioned playing G6 and bishop G7, and then castling. Playing for long-term control of the D4 square is never a bad idea. The only thing about G6, bishop G7 is it tends not to fit too well with E6 and D5. You might be able to make it work in some cases, but... So things I'll check with the engine. I'll certainly look at that position right before white blundered the exchange. So right about here, I'm kind of curious about this. Intuitively, I feel my position is good because I have a nicely entrenched knight in the center. My bishop is bad, but if white takes that nicely entrenched knight, then I can take with a pawn and my bishop may open up later. I'm also threatening knight g3. So I feel like black has good play at this stage, and I might even be slightly better. I'll also look to see if I could have improved my consolidation and execution of the advantage. d4 is interesting. I'm a sucker for these type of clearance pawn moves, but I think this one is instructive because it makes a lot of sense in my eyes. This bishop on b7 currently does not have an operative diagonal, so I'm trying to extend its influence, and I'm already up in exchange 2 points of material, so giving one pawn is not going to kill me. And the fact that I create tactical problems on f3 and g2 was the difference maker. And again, if he took with the knight here, I was going to play h5, kicking away the queen, and disaster will strike on g2. Because he doesn't have queen g3, queen f3, or queen g5, anything like that. All those squares are covered by my pieces. And I think this move was instructive too, rook f d8. I want to play bishop takes f3 and then trade the queens and go after his weak pawns, especially d4. But rook f d8 recognizes that white is helpless, and we can afford to play a building up move before proceeding with our main plan. And before playing this, I just had to make sure he didn't have any shots against my king, like I was looking at bishop takes h7, knight g5, queen h5, stuff like that, and making sure I could diffuse all of those, which I can, I believe. And he's just stuck here. He can't play bishop d2 because bishop takes f3, and then the bishop will hang. And I think after this, it's straightforward. I could also play, instead of queen takes f3, just queen e1 check. But I didn't want to have to calculate too much, and simply trading and then taking a free pawn with tempo on the bishop was more than good enough, and then grabbing another pawn. We're up 3 points of material. We just have to be a bit careful now. Limit the opponent's counterplay. Trade pieces. You know the drill. So let's go to the analysis board, take a quick look. Okay, so my opponent had 1 inaccuracy, 2 mistakes, 0 blunders for a 23 average centipawn loss. And I had straight zeros all down, so 0 inaccuracies, 0 mistakes, 0 blunders for an average centipawn loss of 10. So I'm happy with that. And I was kind of expecting it, not because I played extremely well necessarily, it's just that white didn't challenge me. They played kind of a lame setup, to be honest. I mean, if they really got going here with f4 and could somehow make the kingside attack work, then their setup might have a point. But when I'm breaking with, b5 and knight d4, even d5 here, as the computer is indicating, is a good move. I don't feel like white is the one with the initiative now. Again, the computer wants to go d5, probably playing to block out this bishop. I was just trying to avoid a situation where the structure gets closed like this in the style of a King's Indian attack. This is still acceptable for black, but maybe he could maneuver more comfortably here. And against players who move fast like that, I like to keep some tension in the position because it's just inevitable that they'll make a mistake. Rook c8. Okay, so the engine doesn't like that so much. What does it say to do? It says to take. Well, at least I put him to a decision. If he wants to take, I do have doubled pawns, but I was hoping my pressure on c2 would compensate for that, and indeed, the position is about equal. So c3, and we traded, and c4. This is the type of move you want to play against an opponent who's just blitzing out their moves. Create some tension, force them to a decision, and try to ensure that they can't just play thoughtless moves without any repercussions, basically. So he went here. I think taking is an interesting line. And then I was going to take on e4 either with the bishop or the knight. I hadn't decided. I think I mentioned knight takes with the idea that after this, there's knight g3. I didn't actually see that move, but I always saw that I could play queen b6 and then take on b5 with my queen and regain the pawn. And I figured this position was pretty good. It's even material, and I've got 2 center pawns. White has a 3 versus 1 majority on the queen side, but it's not felt right now. This pawn does a good job of stopping any pass pawn creation. So white played bishop b1, and then I took. And this is a characteristic Sicilian structure. Black having a small center, we would call it, with pawns on e6 and d6. White having just one central pawn on e4. The f4 pawn does help, though. But white's pieces are not in great squares. So here I played d5, I think, which is tempting. Interestingly, the computer likes queen b6. I wonder if the idea there is to try to reposition the queen to c6. So it wants to do this maneuver and then hit the pawn on e4. That's kind of nifty. Yeah, that deserves attention as well. I played d5 because I know from experience in the Sicilian, when you get the d5 advance in and you can follow with knight e4, it tends to give black good chances. So here I'm threatening knight g3, and white played this, covering knight g3, but running into queen b6, and that was the game as far as the engine is concerned. So it says that better is rook d1, threatening to do this now. And then queen check, bishop e3, probably bishop c5, something like that. Knight g4. This knight is sticking around, so I like that. Black's a bit better. h5, take, queen takes, drop the knight back. It's a game, though. f5, trying to support the knight. So white has to exercise some caution, clearly. There are some weaknesses in their camp, especially g3 in this diagonal, and they only addressed one of those weaknesses with queen g4. So I gave this check and then knight f2. As I said, I think queen b6 is better than bishop c5, because if I go bishop c5 and then do this, my bishop is more so a target than a piece that can cause white problems in their back lines. So it's a little less good for black compared to the game, as you can see from the evaluation. Yep, and the engine likes d4. Cool. Yeah, thematic move. If white were allowed to organize their pieces, like say play bishop d2 and rook f1, then white could struggle on. I mean, the position is not super duper open, so even though I have two rooks, there's not enough lines yet for the rooks to be a huge factor. So d4, for all the reasons I've already described, it's a line opening move. It creates problems on the d4 square when white takes with the pawn, and it also hinders their development too. Prevents knight d4, white establishing a knight there. Although interestingly, the computer says this is best. I thought h5 was just crushing here. Okay, you can play queen e2 and allow this to happen, but this should also be very, very good for black. Now, surprisingly, only minus 1.3. I guess he does this. Point being that I'm not mating him on g2 after queen e2. But bishop takes, yeah, and I'm still up material. That's a hard decision to make, though. A human is going to grimace at the thought of having to play knight takes d4 here. He probably saw h5. So after knight takes d4, the engine actually thinks that bishop c5 is a better move, just attacking the knight. And if the knight were to move, he might have trouble on the g1 square now. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I would have found that move. Or maybe I would have played h5 and queen e2, bishop takes g2. But as played, c takes d4. Yep, and rook f d8. Okay, so the engine likes that. Well, I'm happy because even though, for all intents and purposes, white is busted after I win the exchange, you got to be critical of yourself even in positions where you know you're winning. And I like the fact that I found d4 and rook f d8, just being precise. And white's helpless. Yeah, not much to do. Even the engine says f5, only chance. But here we can just swap the queens and take d4. The other line I was thinking about was queen e1, queen f1, take, then here. But yeah, this is similarly good, apparently. And if g takes f3, there's queen e1 check. Or rook takes d4. I guess queen e1, he can play queen g1, can't he? And he doesn't lose the bishop necessarily, although this is really similar to the game. And I don't think there's much to look at after this. I'm playing engine moves. I like it. Here I didn't take on b2 because I just didn't want to allow rook c1. It didn't seem necessary to me. So I played bishop c5 and then he timed out. Okay, so I think good setup against bishop c4. Just keep that in mind if you face this often. Playing e6 and preparing d5 or the b5 break. You can see in this game I never actually played d5 until later. But I played more so for a6 and advancing on the queen side. And use your time. Try to recognize critical moments. Don't blitz out your openings. If the position becomes dangerous for you, spend that time and make sure you make the proper decisions. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.